So let's be very clear, for Gibraltarians, certainly for the GSLP and for the Liberal Party, the terminology of joint use is a term of art. It's set out in the unacceptable to us 1987 airport agreement, and therefore it's not something that we would be prepared to agree to. There has been a lot of discussion and a lot of work done by all of the negotiating teams on how to open up Gibraltar Airport, despite the fact that we have left the European Union. 2 European Union flights on the basis of them operating as if we were still in the European Union. That work is very advanced. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. I've seen this morning that Jose Manuel is talking about Gibraltar Airport being open to flights from Spain and from the rest of the European Union in the future, and that is the terminology that I would recognize as what it is that we are hoping to be able to finally agree in the context of a wider package, the details of which people will see at the time that it's announced, if we can announce it, but which is on the basis of free movement of persons, or rather fluid movement of persons, because free movement of persons also is a term of art under the European treaties, fluid movement of goods across the frontier as well, and in the context of the New Year's Eve Framework Agreement.
In terms of the airport, it seems a bit strange that he carries on using the phrase just at this late stage. Is it a question of I say tomato, you say tomato, and enhanced use and joint use?
No, I think that the terminology of joint use doesn't mean to a Spanish interlocutor what it means so negatively to a Gibraltarian British interlocutor, and therefore I think they use the phraseology simply to express that which we would consider acceptable as well as that which we would consider unacceptable. It's not a term of art in the context of the Spanish lexicon. It may be in the context of the Spanish diplomatic lexicon, but that's not how we're seeing it deployed, and certainly it's not what we are hoping to be able to announce in the way that I hope that people will find actually is acceptable to all 4 of the relevant parties, the European Union and Spain as a member state, the United Kingdom and Gibraltar.
Another thing, he says, the Spanish Foreign Minister says he won't go into detail, but he did mention customs union, harmonisation and Schengen. So what are these details? He said it. How much can you say?
Well, I've given you much more detail in that respect already in the many interviews I've given GBC. As you know, what we're talking about is creating an area of fluid movement for people with Schengen, between Gibraltar and Schengen, as a common immigration space, a common travel area between Gibraltar and Schengen, and doing the same in the context of the fluidity of goods so that people are not impeded in their fluidity of movement because they may have goods. So I've given you and your viewers a lot more detail already in that context than Jose Manuel has simply by talking about those in Spain, although to be fair to him, it's not as if this is a secret. This is what we have said since the 31st of December 2020, we are negotiating in detail.
What does it mean? Does it mean VAT?
No, it doesn't mean VAT. It does mean that we will handle duties in a different way, which would be closer to European rates in order that you have that fluidity. I've discussed this with a number of representative organizations already. We've worked from the way that we have had feedback from business as to how we would be dealing with a potential transaction tax, which I know I've mentioned before, which would mean that Gibraltar would not have VAT, but it would have its own homegrown transaction tax. By the way, of course, by doing that, it would be clear and implicit that we would not be sending any of the amounts collected to Brussels. These would be amounts that would stay in Gibraltar for the Gibraltar exchequer.
Sovereignty is a very important word in Gibraltar, but of course it can mean different things to different people, and some people might give one issue more importance than others. One of the things that the Spanish Foreign Minister spoke about was European law and coming under the ECJ. This is something that's not really an issue for us, is it?
So Gibraltar is very clear that judgments of the European Court of Justice applying to Gibraltar is not something which affects our sovereignty in the analysis that we do. We have almost more of a, if I might say, geographic than esoteric definition of sovereignty, although Definitions of sovereignty matter when they're legal in every respect, and we defend all of them. But we don't think that because we might subject ourselves to interpretations of European pieces of legislation, which are made by the European Court of Justice, that we are somehow ceding sovereignty to Spain, because you're dealing with two completely different entities there. That's not a key issue for us, but in any event, I can tell you that if you look at the TCA that the United Kingdom did with the European Union, there are elements there, and indeed in the Northern Ireland Protocol, there are elements there about interpretations of the European Court of Justice, where you're dealing exclusively with European directives, which are relevant in either of those, being the ones that are finally interpretive of those provisions. That doesn't, for me, create any issue of concern. The people of Gibraltar subjected themselves to that regime being directly applicable for 50 years whilst we were members of the European Union. It's not something that we rebelled against. 96-something% of us voted to remain in the European Union. I know these things matter to Bill Cash. They're not the issue on which we would be concerned to ensure that we've protected sovereignty, jurisdiction and control, because we don't think that this is a challenge to sovereignty.
Chief Minister, we were very excited in Brussels not that long ago. Where are we now?
Well, we're progressing. This is difficult. We could have done a deal sooner, and it would not have been a deal that would have met with my approval and with Jose's approval, Joe Bossano's approval, or the Cabinet's approval.
The British government's approval?
Well, the British government might have been prepared to do a deal on other issues where we might not have been prepared to do on other issues. The British government and the Gibraltar British government, because the government of Gibraltar is also a British government, have not been prepared to do a deal yet because the circumstances have not been right. There has not been a full deal on the table to be done. We have been dealing with a lot of issues that need to be addressed. We are much closer. We are not there yet. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Look, you could go on negotiating forever. At some stage, you've got to say, let's make an assessment of this proposed deal, and do we think it is a good enough deal that we want to do it, given what the alternative is, which is no deal. And although we have a contingency in respect of no deal is very hard, very difficult. Is this deal, which it will not be perfect, better than no deal? If it's not, then it's a bad deal, and then we won't recommend it. We'll keep negotiating, or if the others decide that they don't want to keep negotiating, then we would go to no deal. We're not there yet. There is the issue of European elections and the European Parliament being which makes us want to negotiate towards that deadline. But even then, if we don't meet that deadline, we would not be the ones getting up off the table.